They said she was nothing, a tavern rat, a bastard with no name, no pack, no future. They laughed when the Alpha Prince chose her, called it madness, called it weakness. But when enemies struck in the dark, when blood soaked the palace stones and the throne hung by a thread, it wasn't the nobles who saved the kingdom. It wasn't tradition or birthright that turned the tide. It was her. The girl they dismissed, the bond they mocked. And before the dust settled, every man who underestimated Lyra Hale would learn the price of their arrogance. If you want to see how a nobody from the gutter becomes the most powerful woman in the desert, stick around till the end. Drop a like, tell me what city you're watching from, and let's get into this story. The desert kingdom of Ashmar didn't forgive weakness. It was a land carved from stone and sand, where water was currency and strength was law. The sun bleached bones white within days. The wind carried whispers of rebellion and old blood. And at the heart of it all sat the Varik Citadel, a fortress of black granite and iron gates, where alphas ruled with fists and fangs, and mercy was a word spoken only by the dead. Ronan Varric stood on the balcony of his war room, staring out over the sprawling capital below. Smoke rose from the market districts. Torches flickered in the slums. Beyond the walls, the dunes stretched endlessly, swallowing the horizon in shades of rust and shadow. He was 26, tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair cropped short and eyes the color of cold steel. Scars traced his knuckles, his jaw, the back of his neck, each one a lesson learned in violence. He wore no crown yet, but everyone knew he would. His father, King Aldrich, was dying. The rot had already begun. Whispers in the council chambers, alliances shifting like sand, rivals sharpening their knives in the dark. Ronan had survived 19 assassination attempts since his 18th birthday. He'd killed 4 of his attackers himself. The others had been dealt with quietly, efficiently, the way alphas handled threats. But there was one problem he couldn't kill his way out of. "You need a mate." The voice came from behind him, low, measured, familiar. Ronan didn't turn. "I'm aware," he said flatly. Lord Corvin stepped into the light. A wiry man in his 50s with silver threading his beard and cunning etched into every line of his face. He'd been the king's advisor for decades, and now he served Ronan with the same cold pragmatism. "You're more than aware," Corvin said. "You're running out of time. The council won't confirm you without one. Tradition demands it. An alpha without a mate is unstable, untrustworthy, weak." Ronan's jaw tightened. "I'm not weak." "No," Corvin agreed. "But perception is power, Highness. And right now your enemies are using your unmated status against you. Every day you delay, they grow bolder. Your cousin Theron, he's been making moves, quiet ones, talking to the border lords, suggesting alternatives." Ronan's hand curled into a fist on the balcony rail. Theron, his father's brother's son, a snake in fine silks who smiled with too many teeth and spoke in riddles. Theron had always wanted the throne, but he lacked the strength to take it by force. So he plotted, schemed, waited for Ronan to stumble. "And what would you have me do?" Ronan asked, his voice sharp. "Drag some noble's daughter to the altar? Play house with a woman I don't know, don't trust, and sure as hell don't want?" Corvin's expression didn't change. "You don't have to want her. You just have to claim her. Make it official. Give the council what they need to see. Stability, succession, control. After the coronation, you can do whatever you like. Keep her at arm's length. Take other lovers, it doesn't matter. But you need the bond, and you need it soon." Ronan said nothing. He hated this, hated the politics, the performance, the chains disguised as tradition. He was a fighter, a soldier. He'd earned his place through blood and bone, not bloodlines and ceremony. But Corvin was right. In Ashmar, perception was everything, and an unmated alpha looked vulnerable. "I'll think about it," Ronan said finally. Corvin inclined his head. "Don't think too long." He left without another word, his footsteps echoing down the corridor. Ronan remained on the balcony, staring into the night. The wind carried the scent of smoke and dust and something sharper, desperation, maybe, or fury. He didn't want a mate. He didn't want to tie himself to anyone, least of all some simpering highborn girl raised on perfume and courtly games. But if that's what it took to claim the throne, to protect his kingdom from men like Theron, he'd do it. He just needed to find the right one. Well, The Brass Coin wasn't the worst tavern in Ashmar, but it wasn't far off. It sat on the edge of the market district, wedged between a tannery and a brothel, its walls stained with soot and its floors sticky with spilled ale. The clientele was rough: miners, laborers, off-duty soldiers, traders passing through on their way to nowhere. Fights broke out nightly. Occasionally someone died. The city guard didn't bother coming anymore. Lyra Hale worked there 5 nights a week. She wasn't a serving girl. Those lasted maybe a month before they quit, or worse. She was a dancer. The tavern's owner, a grizzled ex-mercenary named Grit, had hired her 2 years ago after she'd stumbled in half-starved and desperate. He'd looked her over, thin, dirty, furious, and said, "You got rhythm?" She'd shrugged. "I can move." "Good enough." Now she danced on a small wooden platform in the corner, barely elevated above the crowd. The music was crude: drums, a badly tuned lute, someone beating on a hollow gourd. But Lyra moved like fire, sharp and fast, her body lean and strong beneath the thin fabric of her dress. She didn't smile, she didn't flirt. She just danced, hard and defiant, like she was daring the room to look away. Most didn't. She was striking in a way that had nothing to do with softness. Sharp cheekbones, dark eyes that burned too bright, hair the color of old copper tied back in a messy knot. Her hands were scarred, her knuckles rough. She looked like someone who'd survived things she shouldn't have, and maybe enjoyed the fight. The crowd tonight was rowdy, drunk, restless. Lyra ignored them, focused on the beat, on the movement, on drowning out the noise in her head, until someone grabbed her ankle. She looked down. A man, big, bearded, reeking of cheap liquor, grinned up at her with blackened teeth. "Come down here, sweetheart," he slurred. "Let's talk." Lyra's expression didn't change. She twisted her ankle free, hard enough to make him grunt, and kept dancing. The man's grin disappeared. He climbed to his feet, unsteady, his face darkening. "I said come down." The music faltered. The room went quiet. Lyra stopped mid-step and looked at him, really looked. Not with fear, not with submission, with cold, flat contempt. "No," she said. The man's jaw worked. Around them, the crowd shifted, some leaning forward, eager for blood, others pulling back, wary. "You don't tell me no," the man growled. He reached for her again, this time grabbing her wrist, yanking her off the platform. Lyra hit the floor hard, her shoulder slamming into the wood. Pain flared white-hot. But instead of crying out, instead of cowering, she rolled, twisted, and drove her knee straight into the man's groin. He dropped like a stone, wheezing, clutching himself. Lyra stood, breathing hard, her wrist already bruising. She looked around the room, at the men watching, waiting to see what she'd do next. "Anyone else?" she asked quietly. No one moved. She turned and walked toward the back door, ignoring Grit's barked protest, ignoring the murmurs rising behind her. She needed air. She needed to get out before her hands started shaking. Outside, the night was cool and sharp. Lyra leaned against the wall, tilting her head back, forcing herself to breathe slowly. Her wrist throbbed. Her shoulder ached. But she was alive, whole, still standing. That was either very brave or very stupid. She spun. A man stepped out of the shadows, tall, broad, dressed in dark clothing that didn't belong in this part of the city. His face was hard, angular, his eyes pale and unreadable. Lyra's hand drifted toward the small knife tucked into her boot. "Who the hell are you?" The man studied her for a long moment, something unreadable flickering across his expression. Then he smiled, just barely, just enough to make her uneasy. "Someone who might have a better job for you," he said. Lyra didn't lower her guard. "I'm not interested." "You will be. Try me." He took a step closer, close enough that she could see the faint scars along his jaw, the weight in his gaze, close enough that she felt the air shift around him, power, barely leashed, coiled tight beneath the surface. "My name is Ronan Varek," he said quietly, "and I need a mate." Lyra stared at him. Then she laughed, sharp, harsh, incredulous. "You're insane," she said. Ronan didn't react. "Probably. I'm a tavern dancer. You're—" She gestured vaguely at him, at his clothes, his posture, the sheer presence he carried. "Whatever the hell you are." "A prince," Ronan said calmly. Soon to be king. Lyra's laughter died. She looked at him more carefully now, at the scars, the muscle, the cold certainty in his eyes. He wasn't joking. And you want me to be your mate, she said slowly. Yes. Why? Ronan hesitated just for a second. Then he said, because I need someone who won't break. Someone who doesn't care about the politics or the title. Someone who can stand in front of a room full of enemies and not flinch. He paused. Someone like you. Lyra crossed her arms. You don't know anything about me. I know you just took down a man twice your size without hesitation, Ronan said. I know you walked away from that tavern with nothing but your pride. I know you're not afraid. His gaze sharpened. And I know you have nowhere else to go. The words hit like a slap. Lyra's jaw tightened. So what? She said coldly. You're offering me a job, a place to sleep. What's the catch? The catch, Ronan said, is that it won't be easy. The court will hate you. My enemies will try to use you. You'll be watched, judged, tested every single day. And if you fail, if you crack, they'll tear you apart. Sounds delightful. It's survival, Ronan said flatly. Same as what you've been doing out here. Just different enemies. Lyra was silent for a long moment, her mind racing. This was insane. Reckless. Dangerous. Everything about this screamed trap. But he was right about one thing. She had nowhere else to go. What do I get out of it? She asked finally. Ronan's expression shifted, just slightly. Something almost like approval flickering in his eyes. A roof over your head, he said. Food, protection, a title, if you survive long enough to earn it. He paused. And a chance to prove every person who ever looked down on you was wrong. Lyra held his gaze. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then she said, How long? Until the coronation, Ronan said. 3 months. After that, you're free to leave if you want. And if I stay? Then we figure it out. Lyra's lips twitched, not quite a smile. You're asking me to fake a mating bond with a man I just met, walk into a palace full of people who'll want me dead, and pretend I belong there. Yes. You really are insane. Probably, Ronan said again. But you're still considering it. Lyra hated that he was right. She looked back at the tavern, at the dim light spilling through the cracked door, the sound of drunken laughter rising inside. She thought about the man who'd grabbed her, about the bruises she'd wear tomorrow, about the endless grinding sameness of surviving day after day with nothing to show for it but scars and exhaustion. Then she looked at Ronan. One condition, she said. Name it. I don't bow. Not to you, not to anyone. If I'm doing this, I do it on my terms. You want me to play the part? Fine. But I'm not your puppet. Ronan's smile was slow, sharp, and dangerous. Deal. The Varric citadel rose like a blackened fist against the night sky, its walls thick and scarred from centuries of war. Iron gates groaned open as Ronan's carriage rolled through, flanked by guards in dark armor. Inside, the halls were cold and vast, lit by torches that cast flickering shadows on stone floors polished smooth by time. Lyra sat across from Ronan, her hands folded in her lap, her expression carefully blank. She'd said nothing since they left the market district. He hadn't pushed. When the carriage stopped, Ronan stepped out first, then offered her his hand. Lyra hesitated for half a second before taking it. His grip was firm, warm, steadying. This way, he said quietly. He led her through a maze of corridors, past armored guards who stiffened as they passed, past servants who stared openly, past grand doors carved with wolves and flames. Finally, they stopped in front of a heavy oak door near the east wing. Ronan pushed it open. Inside was a room, large, sparsely furnished, but clean, a bed with dark linens, a fireplace, a window overlooking the desert. This is yours, Ronan said. No one comes in without your permission. Lyra stepped inside slowly, her eyes sweeping the space. It was more than she'd had in years, more than she'd ever expected to have again. There's a guard outside, Ronan continued, not to keep you in, to keep others out. If you need anything, tell him. He'll get it. Lyra turned to face him. When do we start? Tomorrow, Ronan said. The council will want to meet you. After that, he paused. After that, it gets harder. I can handle hard. Ronan studied her, something unreadable in his gaze. Then he nodded once. Get some rest, he said. You'll need it. He turned to leave, but Lyra's voice stopped him. Ronan? He looked back. Why me? She asked quietly. Really, you could have chosen anyone. Ronan was silent for a moment. Then he said, because when that man grabbed you, you didn't ask for help. You didn't cry. You didn't wait for someone to save you. His eyes met hers. You saved yourself. And that's the kind of person I need beside me. Before Lyra could respond, he was gone, the door closing softly behind him. She stood alone in the center of the room, her heart pounding, her mind spinning. What the hell had she just agreed to? Morning came too fast. Lyra woke to a knock on the door. A servant, silent and efficient, bringing water, fresh clothes, and a tray of food she barely touched. The dress they'd left was simple but fine. Dark green silk fitted at the waist, modest enough to pass inspection. Lyra hated it immediately. It felt like a costume, but she put it on anyway. Another knock. This time it was Ronan. He looked different in daylight, still hard, still scarred, but somehow sharper, more dangerous. He wore black and silver, the colors of House Varric, a heavy cloak draped over one shoulder. Ready? He asked. No, Lyra said honestly. Ronan's mouth twitched. Good. Neither was I the first time. He led her deeper into the citadel, through halls that grew grander, colder, until they reached a set of towering double doors guarded by soldiers in full plate. The guards stiffened as Ronan approached, their eyes flicking briefly to Lyra before snapping forward again. Council chamber, Ronan said quietly. They'll ask questions. Answer honestly. Don't try to impress them. Just be yourself. And if they don't like me? They won't, Ronan said flatly. But that's not the point. The point is making them believe you're mine. Lyra's stomach twisted. How do I do that? Ronan stopped just before the doors. He turned to face her fully, his gaze intense. You don't flinch, he said. You don't apologize. You stand beside me like you belong there because you do. Understand? Lyra swallowed, nodded. Good. The doors opened. The council chamber was massive, high ceilings supported by stone pillars, a long table dominating the center. 12 men sat around it, all older, all dressed in the finery of lords and advisors. At the head of the table, slumped in a chair too large for his wasting frame, sat King Aldrich Varric. He looked like a ghost, skin pale as parchment, eyes sunken, breath rattling. But when Ronan entered, the king's gaze sharpened, just slightly, just enough to remind everyone in the room that he was still alive, still watching. Ronan, the king rasped. You're late. Apologies, father, Ronan said smoothly. He stepped forward, and Lyra followed, her pulse hammering. Every eye in the room turned to her. She felt the weight of their stares, skeptical, dismissive, predatory. She forced herself to breathe evenly, to keep her chin up, to meet their gazes without flinching. And this, one of the counselors said slowly, is your chosen mate? His tone dripped condescension. Lyra's jaw tightened. Her name is Lyra Hale, Ronan said. And yes. Silence. Then another counselor, a heavy-set man with a beard like iron wire, leaned forward. Hale, he said thoughtfully. I don't recognize the name. What house do you come from, girl? Lyra's throat went dry. She glanced at Ronan, but his expression gave nothing away. No house, she said finally. I'm not noble. The room erupted. Voices rose in sharp protest, outrage, disbelief, mockery. Lyra stood frozen, her heart racing, as the counselors talked over each other, their words blurring into noise. This is absurd. An insult to tradition? She has no bloodline, no rank. Enough. Ronan's voice cut through the chaos like a blade. The room fell silent. He stepped forward, placing himself between Lyra and the council, his posture rigid with barely controlled fury. She is my choice, Ronan said coldly, and my choice is final. Your Highness, the bearded counselor said carefully, with respect, the law is clear. An alpha's mate must be of appropriate standing. This girl, this girl, Ronan interrupted, survived the streets of Ashmar for 2 years alone. She has more courage in her bones than half the women in this city, and she is mine. The counselors exchanged uneasy glances. Lyra's breath caught. Finally, King Aldrich spoke, his voice thin and cracked but still carrying weight. Is this true, boy? You've claimed her? Ronan met his father's eyes. Yes. The king studied him for a long moment. Then his gaze shifted to Lyra. Come here, girl. Lyra's legs felt like lead, but she forced herself to move, stepping around Ronan until she stood directly before the dying king. Aldrich looked her over, slowly, methodically, taking in every detail. Then he smiled, just faintly, and it was the most unnerving thing Lyra had ever seen. You're afraid, he said. Lyra's hands curled into fists. Yes. Good, Aldrich said. Fear means you're not stupid. He paused, wheezing slightly. But you're still here. Why? Lyra hesitated. Then she said, because I have nowhere else to go. And because he asked. Aldrich's smile widened. Honest, I like that. He looked at Ronan. She'll do. The counselors erupted again, but Aldrich raised one skeletal hand, silencing them. The bond will be formalized within the week, he said. After that, she is under the protection of House Varric. Anyone who challenges her challenges my son. His eyes swept the room. And anyone who challenges my son answers to me. Am I understood? Reluctant nods. Muttered agreement. Aldrich waved a hand dismissively. Get out, all of you. The counselors rose and filed out, casting dark looks at Lyra as they passed. She stood perfectly still until the last one was gone. Then her knees buckled. Ronan caught her before she hit the floor, his arms strong around her waist. I've got you, he murmured. Lyra's breath came in short, sharp gasps. I thought, you did fine, Ronan said quietly. Better than fine. They hate me. They hate everyone, Ronan said. Don't take it personally. Lyra laughed, a thin, shaky sound that didn't quite reach humor. Ronan helped her straighten, his hand lingering at her elbow. For a moment, they just stood there, the vast chamber empty around them. This is really happening, Lyra whispered. Yes. And they're really going to try to destroy me. Yes. Lyra met his eyes. Then I guess I'd better get good at surviving. Ronan's expression softened, just slightly, just enough for her to see the man beneath the armor. You already are, he said. The days that followed were a blur of lessons, fittings, and scrutiny. Lyra was assigned a tutor, a stern older woman named Lady Marin, who walked her through etiquette, protocol, the tangled web of alliances and rivalries that governed the court. Lyra absorbed it all with grim determination, committing names and faces to memory, learning which smiles were genuine and which hid knives. She met Ronan's inner circle, Lord Corvin, who watched her with the cool assessment of a man who trusted no one. Captain Dane, the gruff head of Ronan's personal guard, who grunted acknowledgement but offered no warmth, and a handful of others who served Ronan out of loyalty or fear or both. None of them seemed to like her, but none of them openly challenged her either. Ronan himself was a constant, steady presence. He checked on her daily, asked how the lessons were going, warned her about which nobles to avoid. He didn't push, didn't demand, just existed beside her, solid and unshakable. Lyra found herself watching him when he wasn't looking, noticing the way he moved, efficient, controlled, like violence waiting to happen. Noticing the scars on his hands, the tension in his shoulders, the way his eyes never stopped scanning the room for threats. He was dangerous, she knew that, but he was also the only person in this place who hadn't looked at her like she was something to be used or discarded. One evening, a week after her arrival, Ronan found her on the balcony outside her room, staring out at the desert. Can't sleep? He asked. Not really, Lyra admitted. She glanced at him. You? Never could. They stood in silence for a moment, the wind cool against their faces. Why did you really choose me? Lyra asked quietly. Ronan was silent for a long time. Then he said, because everyone else wanted something from me. A title, power, influence. But you, he paused. You just wanted to survive. And I understood that. Lyra turned to look at him fully. Is that all this is to you? Survival? Ronan met her gaze. Right now? Yes, but maybe... He stopped, his jaw tightening. Maybe it doesn't have to stay that way. Lyra's breath caught. Before she could respond, a shout rang out from the courtyard below, sharp, urgent, followed by the clash of steel. Ronan's entire body went rigid. His hand dropped to the sword at his hip. "Stay here," he said. "Like hell," Lyra shot back. Ronan didn't argue. He turned and ran, and Lyra followed, her heart pounding, her instincts screaming that something was very, very wrong. They reached the courtyard just as the first body hit the ground. Guards swarmed the space, weapons drawn, surrounding a figure cloaked in shadow. Blood stained the stones. Someone screamed, and in the center of it all stood a man Lyra had never seen before. Tall, handsome, with golden hair and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Theron Varric. He looked up as Ronan approached, his smile widening. "Cousin," Theron said pleasantly, "we need to talk." Ronan's hand didn't move from his sword hilt, but his voice came out cold and controlled. "You're not supposed to be here." Theron stepped over the body of the guard he'd just killed, casually, as if stepping over a puddle, and spread his hands in mock innocence. "I'm family, cousin. The Citadel is as much mine as yours." His eyes glittered in the torchlight. "Or it will be if you keep making mistakes." Around them more guards arrived, weapons drawn, forming a tight circle. But Theron didn't look concerned. He looked amused. Lyra moved closer to Ronan, her pulse racing. She'd heard about Theron during her lessons with Lady Marin, the cousin who smiled too much, who whispered in corners, who'd somehow survived 3 accusations of treason without a single conviction. "Dangerous," Marin had said. "More dangerous than anyone gives him credit for." Looking at him now, Lyra believed it. "You killed one of my men," Ronan said quietly. "He was in my way," Theron replied with a shrug. "Tragic, really, but I needed to get your attention." His gaze slid to Lyra, and his smile widened. "And I see congratulations are in order. You actually found someone willing to play your little game." Lyra felt the weight of his stare like a physical touch, assessing, calculating, stripping away every layer of pretense. She forced herself to meet his eyes without flinching. "Charming," Theron continued. "But a tavern dancer, Ronan. Really? I expected better from you, or at least someone who could fake nobility convincingly." "She doesn't need to fake anything," Ronan said, his voice dropping to something lethal. "And you need to leave. Now." Theron laughed, light, musical, utterly without warmth. "Oh, I will. I just wanted to deliver a message first." He took a step closer, ignoring the weapons pointed at him. "The council is divided. Half of them think you're unfit. The other half are waiting to see if you'll prove them right." He paused. "And your little stunt with the street rat? That didn't help." Ronan moved so fast Lyra barely saw it. One moment he was beside her. The next he had Theron by the throat, slammed against the courtyard wall, his forearm crushing his cousin's windpipe. "Call her that again," Ronan said softly, "and I'll rip your tongue out." Theron's smile never wavered, even as his face started to purple. "Protective. How sweet." He wheezed slightly. "But threats won't save you, cousin. The clock is ticking. And when you fall, and you will fall, I'll be right there to catch the crown before it hits the ground." Ronan held him there for another long moment. Then he released him, shoving him away with enough force to make Theron stumble. "Get out," Ronan said. Theron straightened his collar, still smiling. "As you wish." He glanced at Lyra one last time. "Enjoy the palace while you can, sweetheart. I have a feeling your stay won't be very long." Then he turned and walked away, flanked by 2 guards who appeared from nowhere, his laughter echoing off the stone walls. Ronan stood perfectly still, his breathing controlled but his muscles coiled tight with barely restrained violence. Lyra touched his arm gently. "Ronan, I'm fine," he said curtly. Then softer, "Are you?" "I think so." Lyra glanced at the dead guard being carried away. "Is he always like that?" "Worse, usually." Ronan turned to Captain Dane, who'd arrived with reinforcements. "Double the watch. No one gets in or out without my approval. And find out how he got past the gate." Dane nodded grimly and barked orders. Within moments, the courtyard was swarming with soldiers. Ronan took Lyra's elbow, guiding her back toward the main hall. "We need to talk." "About Theron?" "About everything." They ended up in Ronan's private study, a sparse room dominated by maps, weapon racks, and a desk covered in reports. He poured 2 glasses of something dark and strong and handed her one. Lyra took it, but didn't drink. "He's going to try to kill you, isn't he?" "He's been trying for years," Ronan said, "just never successfully." "And me?" Ronan met her eyes. "You're a target now. The moment I claimed you, you became a threat to anyone who wants the throne. Theron knows that if he can prove our bond is fake, the council will tear me apart. And the easiest way to prove it's fake is to break me," Lyra finished quietly. "Yes." She took a long drink, the liquor burning her throat. "So what do we do?" "We make it real," Ronan said. "Not the bond, I won't force that on you, but the appearance. We need to be convincing, unshakable. Every moment we're in public, they need to believe you belong at my side." Lyra set down her glass. "How?" Ronan hesitated. Then he said, "You let me teach you how to move in their world, how to talk, how to fight back without weapons, how to survive their games." He paused. "And you trust me, at least when others are watching." "And when they're not?" Something flickered in Ronan's expression, something raw and uncertain that vanished almost immediately. "When they're not, you do whatever you need to survive." Lyra studied him. This man who'd pulled her from nothing, who'd given her a chance she didn't deserve, who stood between her and an entire kingdom of enemies. He was using her, she knew that, but he was also protecting her in the only way he knew how. "All right," she said finally, "teach me." Over the next 2 weeks, Lyra's life became a carefully choreographed performance. Ronan was meticulous. Every morning they walked the palace grounds together, slowly, deliberately, his hand resting at the small of her back or their fingers intertwined. He introduced her to nobles and merchants, to visiting dignitaries and minor lords, always with the same calm authority. "This is Lyra, my mate." The reactions varied. Some offered stiff congratulations. Others barely concealed their contempt. A few simply stared, trying to reconcile the woman in fine silk with the rumors of her origins. Lyra learned to smile through it, to nod politely, to deflect questions with vague pleasantries that revealed nothing. But beneath the surface, she was watching, cataloging every sneer, every whispered insult, every flash of hostility. Lady Marin continued her lessons, drilling Lyra on protocol until she could navigate a formal dinner without making a mistake. How to hold a wine glass, which fork to use, when to speak, and when to stay silent. It was exhausting, but Lyra threw herself into it with the same grim determination she'd used to survive the streets. "You're improving," Marin said one afternoon, her tone grudging. "But improvement isn't enough. These people are sharks. They'll smell weakness and devour you." "Then I won't be weak," Lyra said. Marin's lips twitched, not quite a smile. "Good answer." In the evenings, Ronan trained her himself, not in etiquette, but in survival. He taught her where to strike if someone grabbed her, how to read a room for threats, how to use words as weapons when physical violence wasn't an option. "You can't fight them all," he said during one session, circling her in the empty training yard, "but you can make them think twice about trying." He lunged. Lyra dodged, barely, her breath coming fast. "Again," Ronan said. She learned. Slowly, painfully, but she learned. And through it all, the court watched. The first formal dinner arrived like a death sentence. Lyra stood in her chambers, staring at the gown they'd brought, deep crimson silk that clung to her frame, elegant and severe. She looked like someone else, someone who belonged. It was terrifying. A knock at the door. Ronan entered without waiting for permission, already dressed in black and silver, his hair swept back, his expression unreadable. "Ready?" he asked. "No," Lyra admitted. He crossed to her, adjusting the chain around her neck, a simple silver pendant bearing the Varric wolf. His fingers brushed her collarbone, and she shivered. "You'll be fine," he said quietly. "Just remember, you're not here to make them like you. You're here to make them believe." "Believe what?" "That you're mine," Ronan said, "and that I would burn this entire kingdom to the ground before I let anyone take you from me." Lyra's breath caught. The way he said it, low, fierce, almost convincing, made something twist in her chest. "Is that what you tell them?" she asked. Ronan's eyes met hers. "If I had to." The hall was magnificent and suffocating. Long tables stretched beneath vaulted ceilings, lit by hundreds of candles. Lords and ladies filled the benches, dressed in their finest, their conversations a constant hum of judgment and calculation. Ronan led Lyra to the head table, where King Aldrich sat propped in his chair like a corpse at his own funeral. Theron was there too, seated 3 places down, his smile sharp as broken glass. Lyra took her seat beside Ronan, her spine straight, her hands steady. She could feel the weight of every stare, every whispered comment. Look at her, sitting like she's one of us. Poor Ronan. Desperation makes fools of us all. How long do you think she'll last? Lyra kept her expression neutral, her gaze forward. Ronan's hand found hers under the table, his grip firm and grounding. Breathe, he murmured. She did. The dinner began with speeches, long, flowery tributes to King Aldrich, thinly veiled political maneuvering disguised as toasts. Lyra barely heard them. She focused on eating slowly, on mirroring the people around her, on not doing anything that would give them ammunition. Halfway through the meal, a woman across the table, Lady Corsana, wife of a border lord, leaned forward with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Tell me, dear," Corsana said sweetly, "how does a girl from the streets learn to sit at the high table? Did someone teach you, or are you simply a quick study?" The table went quiet. Lyra felt Ronan tense beside her, but she didn't look at him. She met Corsana's gaze directly. "I learned the same way anyone learns anything worth knowing," Lyra said calmly, "by surviving long enough to figure it out." Corsana's smile froze. "How quaint, isn't it?" Lyra said. "I imagine it must be different when you're born into comfort. No survival required, just existing." A few people nearby choked on their wine. Corsana's face went red. "You presume much for someone with no name and no breeding," Corsana hissed. "And you talk much for someone who's never had to fight for anything," Lyra shot back. "Tell me, Lady Corsana, what would you do if everything you had was stripped away tomorrow? Could you survive? Or would you simply collapse under the weight of your own uselessness?" Dead silence. Then, impossibly, King Aldrich laughed, a dry, rasping sound that cut through the tension like a blade. "I like her," Aldrich wheezed, his sunken eyes gleaming with dark amusement. "She's got teeth." He gestured vaguely at Corsana. "More than I can say for some." Corsana looked like she'd swallowed poison. She sat back, fuming, and said nothing more. Ronan's hand tightened on Lyra's. When she glanced at him, she saw something unexpected in his expression: pride. The rest of the dinner passed without incident, but Lyra knew the damage was done. She'd made an enemy. Probably several. Afterward, as they walked back to her chambers, Ronan finally spoke. "That was reckless." "I know. And brilliant." Lyra looked at him, surprised. Ronan's mouth curved into something almost like a smile. "You didn't back down. You didn't apologize. You made her look weak in front of everyone." He paused. "That's exactly what you needed to do." "Even if it makes them hate me more?" "They already hated you, Ronan said bluntly. "Now they're afraid of you. That's better." Lyra wasn't sure she agreed, but she didn't argue. As they reached her door, Ronan hesitated. "Thank you," he said quietly. "For what?" "For being exactly who you are." Before Lyra could respond, he turned and walked away, leaving her standing alone in the empty corridor, her heart pounding for reasons she couldn't name. The attack started 3 days later. Nothing obvious. Nothing traceable. Just accidents. A loose stone in the hallway that sent Lyra sprawling, bruising her ribs. A servant who spilled scalding tea across her lap during breakfast, leaving burns on her thigh. A door that swung shut too fast, catching her fingers hard enough to draw blood. Each time, apologies were offered. Each time it was blamed on clumsiness, bad luck, coincidence. But Lyra knew better. Someone wanted her gone. And they were getting bolder. Ronan noticed. Of course he noticed. He assigned more guards, changed her routes through the palace, personally inspected her chambers each night. But he couldn't be everywhere. and whoever was orchestrating this knew it. The breaking point came during a council meeting. Lyra wasn't supposed to be there. Mates didn't attend council sessions unless specifically invited. But Ronan had asked her to come, to stand beside him, to show the lords that she was more than a decorative piece. She'd agreed, despite the knot of dread in her stomach. The meeting was brutal. Arguments over taxes, border disputes, resource allocation, all of it laced with thinly veiled attacks on Ronan's leadership. Theron sat across the table, saying little, but smiling constantly, his presence a reminder that he was waiting for Ronan to fail. Halfway through, Lord Corvin stood. "Your Highness," he said carefully, "there's a matter we must address. It concerns your mate." Ronan's expression went cold. "What matter?" Corvin glanced at Lyra, then back at Ronan. "There have been questions about her origins, her suitability. Some of the lords feel that without proper verification of her background, the bond cannot be considered legitimate." "Her background is irrelevant," Ronan said flatly. "With respect, it's not," another counselor interjected. "Tradition demands—" "Tradition," Ronan interrupted, "can go to hell." The room erupted. Voices overlapped, angry and indignant. Lyra stood frozen, her nails digging into her palms. Then Theron spoke. "Perhaps," he said smoothly, "the lady could speak for herself. After all, if she's to be our future queen, shouldn't we hear from her directly?" Every eye turned to Lyra. She felt the trap closing. If she stayed silent, they'd call her weak. If she spoke, they'd tear apart every word. But she'd survived worse. Lyra stepped forward, her voice steady. "You want to know about my background? Fine. I'll tell you." She looked around the table, meeting each hostile gaze. "I grew up in the slums. No family, no money, no protection. I stole to eat, fought to survive, watched people die in the streets because no one cared enough to help them." She paused. "And I learned something you all seem to have forgotten, that power without purpose is just cruelty and fancy clothes." Silence. "You question whether I'm suitable," Lyra continued, "whether I belong here. But I've seen more of this kingdom than any of you. I know what it's like when the system you built fails the people it's supposed to protect. And maybe, just maybe, that's exactly the perspective you need." For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Theron clapped, slow, mocking, his smile razor-sharp. "Inspiring, truly. But words don't change bloodlines, sweetheart, and bloodlines are what matter here." "No," came a voice from the head of the table. King Aldrich leaned forward, his skeletal hand raised. "Strength matters, survival matters, and she has both." His gaze swept the room. "Anyone who disagrees can take it up with me. While I'm still breathing." The counselors exchanged uneasy looks but said nothing. Aldrich waved a dismissive hand. Meeting adjourned. As the lords filed out, Lyra felt her knees go weak. Ronan caught her elbow, steadying her. "You all right?" he asked quietly. "I don't know," Lyra admitted. "Did I just make things worse?" "No," Ronan said. "You made them see you. That's the first step." But as they left the chamber, Lyra caught Theron watching from the shadows, his smile colder than ever. And she knew this was far from over. That night, Lyra couldn't sleep. She paced her chambers, replaying the day's events, trying to quiet the voice in her head that whispered she didn't belong, that she'd never survive, that this was all going to collapse and bury her. A soft knock interrupted her spiral. She opened the door to find Ronan, still dressed, his expression tight with exhaustion. "Can't sleep either?" he asked. "No." He stepped inside without asking, closing the door behind him. For a moment they just stood there, the silence heavy between them. "I'm sorry," Ronan said finally, "for dragging you into this, for putting you in their crosshairs." "You gave me a choice," Lyra said. "I made it." "Did you?" Ronan's eyes searched hers. "Or did I just offer you the least terrible option?" Lyra didn't answer, because he was right, and they both knew it. "I won't let them hurt you," Ronan said quietly. "Whatever it takes." "You can't control everything," Lyra said. "Theron proved that." "Then I'll get better at it." Lyra almost smiled. "You're insufferable." "I'm aware." They fell silent again. Then Lyra asked, "Do you regret it?" Choosing me? Ronan's expression shifted, something raw and unguarded crossing his face. No, not for a second. Even though I'm making everything harder? You're the only thing keeping me sane, Ronan said. Then quieter. I didn't expect that. Lyra's breath caught. She took a step closer, close enough to see the exhaustion in his eyes, the weight he carried, the cracks in his armor. What happens when this is over? She asked. When you're king, and I've fulfilled my end of the bargain. Ronan was silent for a long moment. Then he said, I don't know, but I think... He stopped, started again. I think I'd like to find out, if you're willing. Before Lyra could respond, a scream shattered the night. They both ran. The scream came from the east wing, servants' quarters, dimly lit and maze-like. Ronan drew his sword as they rounded the corner, Lyra right behind him. They found the source quickly. A young maid lay crumpled against the wall, blood seeping from a gash on her temple. Standing over her, illuminated by flickering torchlight, was a figure cloaked in black. The figure turned. Not Theron. Someone else. Someone smaller, faster, their face hidden beneath a hood. Who are you? Ronan demanded. The figure didn't answer. Instead, they lunged, not at Ronan, but at Lyra. She barely had time to react. The blade flashed toward her throat. Ronan roared, slamming into the attacker with enough force to send them both crashing into the wall. They fought. Brutal, vicious, close-quarters combat. Ronan was stronger, but the attacker was quick, slipping through his guard, aiming for vital points with precision that spoke of training. Lyra grabbed a fallen torch and swung it hard, catching the attacker across the shoulder. They hissed in pain, stumbling back. Ronan didn't hesitate. He grabbed them by the throat and slammed them against the wall, ripping off the hood. A woman. Young, maybe Lyra's age, with sharp features and cold, empty eyes. Who sent you? Ronan growled. The woman smiled, blood-stained and defiant. You'll find out soon enough. Then she bit down hard on something hidden in her mouth. Her body convulsed once, violently, and went limp. Poison. Ronan dropped her, cursing. Damn it! Lyra stared at the body, her hand shaking. She was trying to kill me. Yes. And she chose death over capture. Yes. Lyra looked up at Ronan, and for the first time since entering the palace, she felt real fear settle deep in her bones. This isn't just politics anymore, is it? She whispered. Ronan's jaw tightened. No, it's war. Guards flooded the corridor within minutes, their boots thundering against stone, weapons drawn and ready. Captain Dane took one look at the dead assassin and the injured maid and started barking orders. Secure the wing, search every room, find out how the attacker got in. Ronan stood motionless, his sword still drawn, blood speckling his knuckles. His eyes were fixed on the woman's body, his expression carved from granite. Lyra pressed her back against the wall, trying to slow her racing heart. The torch had fallen from her hands, still smoking on the floor. She could smell burnt hair, blood, the bitter tang of poison. Ronan, she said quietly. He didn't respond, didn't even blink. Ronan, she tried again, louder this time. Finally, he turned to look at her. Whatever he saw in her face made something crack in his expression, just for a moment, just long enough for her to see the fear beneath the fury. You're not hurt? He asked, his voice rougher than she'd ever heard it. No, I'm fine. You're sure? Yes. He crossed to her in 2 strides and pulled her into his arms, hard, desperate, like he was trying to convince himself she was real. Lyra froze for a heartbeat, then slowly wrapped her arms around him, feeling the tension coiled in every muscle, the way his breath came too fast against her hair. I'm all right, she whispered. I'm here. Ronan held her for another long moment before pulling back, his hands gripping her shoulders. This changes everything. You can't stay in the East Wing anymore. You'll move to my chambers tonight. Ronan, it's not a suggestion, he said flatly. Someone just tried to kill you in the middle of the palace, in the middle of my home, and they were willing to die rather than talk. His jaw tightened. I'm not giving them another chance. Lyra wanted to argue, but the look in his eyes stopped her. This wasn't the calculating prince or the strategic alpha. This was a man who just watched someone come within inches of murdering the one person he'd chosen to protect. All right, she said finally. Dane approached, his expression grim. Your Highness, we've secured the wing. No other intruders found, but we did find this. He held up a small cloth pouch, stained dark. Poison. Same type she used on herself. Looks like she had a backup plan in case the blade missed. Ronan took the pouch, examined it briefly, then handed it back. Send it to the apothecary. I want to know where it came from, who makes it, and who's bought it recently. He paused. And double the guard on every entrance. I want names, faces, and purposes logged for anyone who enters or leaves. No exceptions. Yes, sir. As Dane moved away, Ronan turned back to Lyra. Come on, let's get you out of here. They walked through the palace in silence, flanked by 6 armed guards. Lyra could feel eyes on them from every shadow, every doorway. News of the attack would spread by morning. By noon, the entire kingdom would know someone had tried to kill the future queen. The thought made her stomach twist. Ronan's chambers were in the central tower, heavily guarded, with only one entrance and thick stone walls. Inside, the space was larger than Lyra's had been, but just as sparse. Maps covered one wall, weapons lined another. A massive bed dominated the far corner, dark furs piled on top of simple linens. You'll sleep there, Ronan said, nodding toward the bed. I'll take the floor. That's ridiculous. It's your room. And you're the one who was just attacked, Ronan said. I'm not arguing about this. Lyra opened her mouth to protest, then stopped. The exhaustion in his eyes, the rigid set of his shoulders. He needed this. Needed to feel like he was protecting her in some tangible way. Fine, she said quietly. Thank you. Ronan nodded once, then moved to the window, staring out at the dark expanse of desert beyond. Lyra watched him for a moment, unsure what to say, unsure if words would even help. Finally, she asked, What do we do now? We find out who's behind this, Ronan said, and we end them. You think it was Theron? I know it was Theron, Ronan said flatly. He's the only one with the resources, the motive, and the arrogance to try something this bold. Then why not just arrest him? Ronan's laugh was bitter. Because I can't prove it. The assassin killed herself before talking. There's no trail, no evidence, nothing that ties back to him directly. And if I move against a member of the royal family without proof, the council will turn on me. They'll say I'm paranoid, unstable, unfit to rule. He turned to face her. That's how Theron wins, not through strength, but through doubt. Lyra crossed her arms, thinking. Then we make him overconfident, make him think we're weak, that the attack rattled us. Let him get sloppy. Ronan's eyes narrowed. That's dangerous. Everything about this is dangerous, Lyra shot back. But if we keep reacting, we're just playing his game. We need to change the rules. For a long moment, Ronan just stared at her. Then, slowly, his mouth curved into something almost like a smile. You're starting to think like a queen, he said quietly. Lyra wasn't sure if that was a compliment or a warning. The next morning, word of the attack spread like wildfire. By the time Lyra and Ronan appeared at breakfast, her wearing a high-necked dress that covered the bruises forming on her throat, him with his sword strapped visibly at his side. The entire court was buzzing. Nobles whispered behind their hands. Servants averted their eyes. Even the guards looked uneasy, their gazes darting toward Lyra with something between pity and suspicion. Theron was already seated at the high table, looking immaculate in deep blue silk, his expression one of perfectly calibrated concern. Cousin, he said as Ronan and Lyra sat down, I heard about the incident. How terrifying. Is your companion all right? She's fine, Ronan said coldly. Thank the gods, Theron said smoothly. I can't imagine what kind of monster would target an innocent woman. You must be furious. I am. Of course. The Theron leaned back, his fingers drumming lightly on the table. I've been thinking, perhaps it would be wise to increase security around Lady Lyra. Assign her a personal guard, someone trustworthy. He paused. I'd be happy to recommend a few men from my own detail. Ronan's hand tightened on his cup. That won't be necessary. Are you sure? After all, if something were to happen to her, nothing will happen to her, Ronan interrupted, his voice dropping to something lethal. Because anyone who tries will answer to me, personally. The threat hung in the air, sharp and unmistakable. Theron's smile didn't waver, but something cold flickered in his eyes. Of course, he said lightly. I was only trying to help. Breakfast continued in tense silence. Lyra forced herself to eat, to appear calm and unbothered, even as her skin crawled with the weight of all those stares. Halfway through the meal, King Aldrich was carried in on a litter, his breathing labored, his face the color of old parchment. He was dying. Everyone could see it. The question was only how long he had left. As servants settled him into his chair, Aldrich's gaze swept the table, landing on Lyra. For a long moment, he just looked at her. Then he gestured weakly. "Girl," he rasped. "Come here." Lyra glanced at Ronan, who nodded slightly. She rose and approached the king, her heart hammering. Up close, Aldrich looked even worse, skin stretched tight over bone, eyes sunken but still sharp, still burning with something fierce and unbroken. "You survived," he said. "Yes, Your Majesty." "Good." He coughed, a wet, rattling sound. "That's the first test. There will be more." "I know." Aldrich's mouth twisted into something that might have been a smile. "My son chose well. Better than I did, at least." He paused, his breath wheezing. "You have fire. Don't let them put it out." Lyra swallowed hard. "I won't." "See that you don't." Aldrich waved a skeletal hand. "Go, sit, eat, pretend you're not scared." Lyra returned to her seat, shaken. Ronan's hand found hers under the table, his grip steady and grounding. "What did he say?" Ronan asked quietly. "That I passed the first test." Ronan's jaw tightened. "There shouldn't be tests. You shouldn't have to prove yourself to anyone." "But I do," Lyra said simply. "We both know that." Before Ronan could respond, Lord Corvin appeared at his elbow, his expression grave. "Your Highness," he said quietly, "we need to talk. Privately." Ronan exchanged a glance with Lyra, then stood. "Wait here, I'll be back." He followed Corvin out of the hall. Lyra watched them go, unease settling in her stomach like lead. She was alone now, surrounded by enemies, and everyone knew it. Lady Corsana chose that moment to lean forward, her smile saccharine and poisonous. "Poor dear," she said loudly enough for the nearby tables to hear. "You must be terrified. First the streets, now assassins. Wherever you go, danger seems to follow." A few people laughed, polite, cutting sounds that made Lyra's hands curl into fists beneath the table. "Funny," Lyra said evenly. "I was thinking the same thing, except the danger didn't find me. I walked into it willingly, which is more than I can say for people who hide behind walls and servants and pretend they're safe." Corsana's smile froze. "Are you suggesting—" "I'm suggesting," Lyra interrupted, "that survival isn't about avoiding danger. It's about facing it and refusing to break. Something you wouldn't understand." The laughter died. Corsana's face flushed red. "You insolent little—" "Careful," came a new voice. Lyra looked up to find Theron watching, his expression amused. "Lady Corsana, I believe you're embarrassing yourself." Corsana sputtered, but Theron's attention had already shifted to Lyra. "Walk with me," he said. It wasn't a request. Every instinct screamed at Lyra to refuse. But refusing publicly would look like fear, and fear was weakness. She stood. "Lead the way." They walked through the palace gardens, a sprawling maze of stone pathways, withered plants clinging to life in the desert heat, and fountains long since run dry. Theron moved with casual grace, his hands clasped behind his back, his smile never quite reaching his eyes. "You're bold," he said finally. "I'll give you that. Most women in your position would have crumbled by now." "I'm not most women." "No," Theron agreed. "You're not, which makes you interesting and dangerous." Lyra kept her expression neutral. "I'm not dangerous to anyone who isn't a threat to me." Theron laughed, light, musical, utterly devoid of warmth. "That's the problem, though, isn't it? Everyone here is a threat, to you, to Ronan, to each other. This place runs on threats and alliances and knowing when to strike." He stopped walking and turned to face her fully. "And you, my dear, are a liability." "To whom?" "To Ronan," Theron said bluntly. "You're his weakness, his soft spot, the one thing his enemies can use against him." He paused. "Like they did last night." Lyra's blood went cold. "What are you saying?" I'm saying that as long as you're here, Ronan is vulnerable, and vulnerability gets people killed. Theron's smile widened. So here's my advice. Leave. Tonight. Quietly. I'll even give you money, enough to start over somewhere far from here, somewhere safe. And if I refuse, then more people will die, Theron said simply. Servants, guards, maybe even Ronan himself, because his enemies know exactly how to hurt him now. He leaned closer, his voice dropping. They know he cares about you, and caring is the most dangerous thing an alpha can do. Lyra met his gaze, refusing to flinch. You're the one behind the attack. Theron's smile never wavered. Prove it. They stared at each other for a long moment. Then Lyra said, I'm not leaving. I was afraid you'd say that. Theron straightened, brushing imaginary dust from his sleeve. Then I suppose we'll have to do this the hard way. Before Lyra could respond, he turned and walked away, his laughter echoing off the stone walls. Lyra stood alone in the garden, her heart pounding, her mind racing. She should tell Ronan. She should run straight to him and repeat every word Theron had said. But what good would it do? Theron had been careful. No direct threats, no admissions, just implications and insinuations wrapped in concern. Proving he was behind the attack would require evidence they didn't have, and accusing him without proof would only make things worse. Lyra clenched her fists, frustration boiling beneath her skin. She was trapped, cornered, and Theron knew it. A soft sound behind her made Lyra spin. A young woman stood at the edge of the garden. A servant, maybe 16, with dark hair and frightened eyes. Lady Lyra? She whispered. Yes? The girl glanced around nervously, then stepped closer. I need to tell you something. About last night. Lyra's pulse quickened. What about it? I saw the woman, the one who attacked you, before she went to your wing. The girl's voice trembled. She was talking to someone, in the servants' corridor. Who? The girl hesitated, fear written across her face. Then she whispered, Lord Theron's steward. I heard them arguing. She wanted more money. He told her to finish the job or she'd get nothing. Lyra's breath caught. Can you testify to this? Tell the prince? I don't know. If Lord Theron finds out I talked, he'll... The girl's eyes filled with tears. He'll kill my family. He's done it before. Lyra's mind raced. This was it. The evidence they needed. But if the girl was too terrified to speak, it was worthless. Listen to me, Lyra said firmly. I'll protect you. Ronan will protect you. But we need your testimony. Without it, Theron wins. The girl shook her head, backing away. I'm sorry. I can't. I wanted to warn you. Be careful. Before Lyra could stop her, the girl turned and fled, disappearing into the maze of corridors. Lyra cursed under her breath. She had a lead, a witness, but no way to use it without putting an innocent girl in danger. She needed to tell Ronan, needed to figure out their next move. But when she returned to the hall, he was gone. Corvin intercepted her instead, his expression grave. The prince has been called to the border, he said quietly. Reports of raiders. He'll be gone for 3 days, maybe 4. Lyra's stomach dropped. He didn't tell me. It came up suddenly. He left instructions to keep you safe. Corvin's gaze was steady but unreadable. I suggest you stay in his chambers. Don't wander alone. Don't trust anyone. Not even you? Corvin's mouth twitched. Especially not me. He walked away, leaving Lyra standing in the empty corridor, dread settling over her like a shroud. Ronan was gone. Theron was circling, and she was alone. The next 3 days were a nightmare of isolation and paranoia. Lyra stayed in Ronan's chambers as instructed, the door guarded at all times. But she felt like a caged animal, restless, watched, waiting for the next attack. Meals were brought to her. She ate sparingly, checking every bite for poison. She slept fitfully, jerking awake at every sound, her hand always reaching for the knife Ronan had left on the bedside table. On the second night, someone tried the door. Lyra heard the handle turn softly, slowly, testing. She was on her feet instantly, knife in hand, her heart hammering. The door didn't open. The guard outside shouted a challenge. Footsteps retreated quickly. When Lyra checked with the guard afterward, he claimed he'd seen no one. She stopped sleeping after that. By the third day, exhaustion had carved hollows under her eyes. She stood at the window, staring out at the desert, trying to calm the panic rising in her chest. She couldn't do this. Couldn't survive like this, trapped, hunted, waiting for Theron to make his next move. She needed to act, needed to take control. An idea formed, reckless, dangerous, but the only option she had left. That evening, Lyra sent word to Theron requesting a private meeting. She expected him to refuse, to ignore her, to laugh. Instead, he agreed immediately. They met in a neutral location, a sitting room in the West Wing, small and relatively public. 2 guards stood outside. Theron arrived alone, his smile as sharp as ever. "Lady Lyra," he said, settling into a chair with easy grace. "To what do I owe the pleasure?" Lyra remained standing. "I want to make a deal." Theron's eyebrows rose. "How intriguing. What kind of deal?" "You want me gone," Lyra said bluntly. "You think I'm Ronan's weakness. Fine, I'll leave. But I want something in return." "And what would that be?" "Safe passage out of the kingdom," Lyra said. "Money, and a guarantee that no one follows me. No assassins, no accidents. I disappear, and you leave me alone." Theron leaned back, studying her. "And Ronan?" "I'll tell him I can't do this anymore, that it's too dangerous. He'll understand." "Will he?" Theron's smile widened. "Because from where I'm sitting, he seems rather attached to you. Might not take your departure well." "He'll survive," Lyra said flatly. "He's good at that." Theron was silent for a long moment, his eyes gleaming with something cold and calculating. Then he said, "All right, I accept your terms. But I have one condition." "What?" "You leave tonight," Theron said, "before Ronan returns, and you write him a letter, something that will make him believe you chose to go, that you weren't coerced." Lyra's heart pounded. This was it, the moment of no return. "Fine," she said. "I'll write the letter. Have the money and the horses ready by midnight." Theron stood, extending his hand. "Then we have a deal." Lyra hesitated for only a second before taking it. His grip was cold, smooth, and felt like shaking hands with a serpent. "Pleasure doing business with you," Theron said. Then he leaned closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. "And just so we're clear, if you're lying, if this is some kind of trick, I'll kill you myself." Slowly. Lyra met his gaze without flinching. "Understood." Theron released her hand and walked away, whistling softly. The moment he was gone, Lyra let out a shaky breath. Her hands were trembling, her pulse raced, but it was done. The trap was set. Now she just had to survive it. She returned to Ronan's chambers and wrote the letter, carefully, deliberately, making it sound just believable enough. She talked about fear, about not being strong enough, about needing to leave before she got him killed. It felt like carving out her own heart. When she finished, she sealed it and left it on the desk. Then she changed into traveling clothes, dark, simple, practical, and tucked the knife into her boot. Midnight came. A soft knock at the door. Lyra opened it to find a cloaked figure waiting, one of Theron's men, she assumed. "Ready?" he asked. "Yes." He led her through a maze of back corridors, avoiding the main halls, moving quickly and quietly. Lyra memorized every turn, every landmark, her mind working furiously. They emerged into the stables. 2 horses waited, already saddled. A small pouch of coins sat on one saddle. "Mount up," the man said. "We ride north. There's a caravan that'll take you the rest of the way." Lyra approached the horse slowly, her heart hammered. This was the moment. If she was wrong, if she'd misjudged Theron's arrogance, she was about to die. She swung into the saddle. And then everything went to hell. The stable doors slammed shut. Torches flared to life around the perimeter, illuminating a circle of armed men, at least 20, all wearing Theron's colors. Theron himself stepped from the shadows, applauding slowly. "Bravo," he said. "Really? That was a beautiful performance. The frightened girl, begging for escape. I almost believed it." Lyra's blood turned to ice. "What? Did you really think I'd let you walk away?" Theron interrupted, his smile vicious. "After everything you've seen? Everything you know?" He shook his head. "No, sweetheart. You were never leaving this palace alive." Lyra reached for her knife, but the man who'd led her here grabbed her wrist, twisting it hard enough to make her cry out. The blade clattered to the ground. The letter was a nice touch, though, Theron continued. Very convincing. Ronan will come back to find you gone, a heartfelt goodbye left behind, and no evidence of foul play. He'll be devastated, distracted, weak. He stepped closer. And while he's drowning in grief, I'll make my move. The council will turn on him. The throne will be mine. And you? Well, you'll just be another casualty of palace life. Lyra struggled against the man holding her, but his grip was iron. Around them, the circle tightened. Any last words? Theron asked. Lyra met his gaze, her mind racing. She'd gambled and lost. She was going to die here, alone, and Ronan would never know the truth. Unless… Just one thing, she said, her voice steady despite the terror flooding her veins. You talk too much. Theron's smile faltered. What? The stable doors exploded inward. Ronan came through like a storm, sword drawn, eyes blazing with fury, flanked by Captain Dane and 24 royal guards. The assassins barely had time to react before steel met flesh, screams filling the air. The man holding Lyra released her and reached for his weapon. She didn't give him the chance. She drove her elbow into his throat, grabbed her fallen knife, and buried it in his side. He dropped, gasping. Chaos erupted. Men fought and died in the flickering torchlight. Blood sprayed across straw and stone. And in the center of it all, Ronan cut through Theron's guards like they were nothing, his focus locked on one target. Theron. The two men faced each other across the carnage, breathing hard, weapons raised. You should have stayed at the border, Theron snarled. I came back early, Ronan said coldly. Funny how that worked out. She told you, Theron spat, glancing at Lyra. The little bitch! She didn't have to, Ronan interrupted. I've known what you were planning for weeks. I just needed you to move first, to make a mistake. His smile was savage. And you did. You couldn't resist the chance to gloat. Theron's face twisted with rage. I'll kill you both! He lunged. Ronan met him mid-strike, their blades clashing with a sound like thunder. They fought viciously. No technique, no grace, just raw violence and hatred. Theron was fast, skilled, desperate. But Ronan was stronger, fueled by fury and something deeper, something protective and primal that turned him into a force of nature. Lyra watched, her heart in her throat, as they circled and struck and parried. Around them, the battle was ending. Theron's men were dead or captured. The guards secured the perimeter. But this fight, this was personal. Finally, Ronan saw his opening. He feinted left, then drove his blade through Theron's shoulder, pinning him to the stable wall. Theron screamed, his sword falling from nerveless fingers. Ronan leaned in close, his voice a lethal whisper. You're done. The council? Theron gasped. They'll never… The council will accept what I give them, Ronan said flatly, which is your confession, your men, your conspiracy. He twisted the blade slightly, making Theron cry out. And you're going to give it to them, every detail, every name, or I'll make sure you die so slowly you'll beg for mercy long before the end. Theron's face was white with pain and fury, but he nodded jerkily. Ronan pulled the blade free and stepped back, letting Dane's guards seize Theron and drag him away. Then he turned to Lyra. She stood frozen, covered in blood, some hers, most not, her hands shaking, her eyes wide. Ronan crossed to her in 3 strides and pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. I thought I'd lost you, he said hoarsely. When I got your letter, it was bait, Lyra whispered. I needed him to move, to prove what he was planning. You used yourself as bait, Ronan said, pulling back to look at her. Do you have any idea how insane that was? It worked. You could have died, but I didn't, Lyra's voice cracked. You came back. You saved me. Ronan's hands framed her face, his thumbs brushing away tears she hadn't realized were falling. I'll always come back, he said fiercely. Always, do you understand? Lyra nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. Around them, guards cleaned up the aftermath. Bodies were removed. Evidence collected. The night slowly bled toward dawn. But in that moment, standing in the wreckage of Theron's plot, Lyra realized something that terrified her more than any assassin. She wasn't pretending anymore. This wasn't a game, wasn't survival, wasn't strategy. Somewhere along the way, she'd stopped faking. And Ronan, fierce, damaged, impossible Ronan, had become the one thing she'd sworn never to need, someone worth staying for. The realization hit her like a physical blow, stealing her breath and making her knees weak. Ronan must have felt her sway because his grip tightened, steadying her. "Lyra?" His voice carried concern, roughened by exhaustion and adrenaline. "Talk to me." She couldn't. Not yet. Not when her thoughts were spinning too fast, when everything she'd believed about herself, about survival, about keeping distance, about never letting anyone close enough to hurt her, had just shattered in the space of a heartbeat. "I need air," she managed. Ronan studied her face for a long moment, then nodded. "Come on." He led her out of the stables, away from the blood and bodies, past the guards who straightened as they passed. The desert wind hit her face, cool and sharp, carrying the scent of sand and distant rain. Above them, the sky was beginning to lighten, deep purple fading to gray at the edges. They climbed to the eastern ramparts, a section of wall overlooking the capital. Below, the city slept, unaware that the man who'd plotted to destroy it was now chained in the citadel's dungeon. Lyra leaned against the stone, letting the wind pull at her hair, trying to quiet the storm in her chest. "You're scaring me," Ronan said quietly. Lyra laughed, a shaky, breathless sound. "I'm scaring myself." "What happened back there? After I—" He stopped, his jaw tightening. "Did someone hurt you? Touch you?" "No, nothing like that." Lyra turned to face him, forcing herself to meet his eyes. "You came back." "Of course I came back." "No, I mean—" She struggled for words. "You were supposed to be at the border for 3 more days, but you came back early." "Why?" Ronan was silent for a moment. Then he said, "Because something felt wrong. The reports didn't add up. The timing was too convenient." His eyes searched hers. "And because leaving you here, even with guards, even with every precaution, it felt like ripping my arm off and walking away from it." Lyra's breath caught. "I made it 10 miles, Ronan continued, his voice low and rough. 10 miles before I turned the entire company around and rode back like my life depended on it. Dane thought I'd lost my mind." He stepped closer, close enough that she could see the exhaustion etched into his features, the fear he'd been carrying. "Maybe I had. Maybe I have. Because the thought of something happening to you while I was gone—" He stopped, his hands curling into fists. "I couldn't breathe, Lyra. Couldn't think. All I could see was you alone in danger and me too far away to stop it." Lyra felt something crack open inside her chest, something she'd kept locked and buried for so long she'd forgotten it was there. "I was terrified," she whispered. "When Theron's men surrounded me, when I realized I'd miscalculated, I thought I was going to die without ever telling you." She stopped, the words catching in her throat. "Telling me what?" Lyra looked at him, really looked, at the scars and the exhaustion and the fierce protectiveness that radiated from him like heat, at the man who'd pulled her from nothing and given her a chance when no one else would, at the alpha who'd faced down an entire kingdom to stand beside her. "That this isn't fake anymore," she said. "Not for me." Ronan went absolutely still. For a heartbeat, Lyra thought she'd made a terrible mistake, that she'd misread everything, that the connection she felt was one-sided and she'd just humiliated herself. Then he moved. He crossed the distance between them in a single stride, his hands cupping her face, his eyes burning with something fierce and desperate and utterly undeniable. "It was never fake," he said hoarsely. "Not from the moment I saw you take down that drunk in the tavern. Not from the first night you stood in the council chamber and refused to bow. Not from any of it." His thumbs brushed her cheekbones. "I told myself it was strategy, that I needed you for the throne, for the council, for appearances. But that was a lie I told myself because admitting the truth was—" He stopped, his voice breaking. "Terrifying." "What truth?" Lyra whispered. "That I need you," Ronan said. "Not as a political tool or a convenient mate, but as the person I wake up thinking about and fall asleep worrying over. As the woman who makes me want to be better than I am, as—" He stopped, searching for words. as everything. Lyra's hands came up to cover his, her vision blurring with tears she didn't try to hide. "Ronan, I love you," he said, the words raw and honest and completely unguarded. "I'm in love with you, Lyra, and I don't know when it happened or how to stop it, or even if I want to. All I know is that when I got that letter, when I thought you'd left," his voice cracked, "I understood what my father meant when he said losing my mother broke something in him that never healed, because the thought of losing you breaks me." Lyra couldn't speak, couldn't breathe, could only stand there, held by this man who'd just laid himself bare, and feel the weight of her own truth pressing against her ribs. "I love you too," she whispered. "I didn't want to. I tried not to. But somewhere between surviving and pretending and fighting to stay alive," she stopped, a sob catching in her throat. "You became the reason I wanted to." Ronan kissed her then, desperate and gentle and fierce all at once, pouring everything he couldn't say into the press of his mouth against hers. Lyra kissed him back, her hands fisting in his shirt, anchoring herself to him as the world fell away and left only this, them, together, finally, honest. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, Ronan rested his forehead against hers. "What do we do now?" Lyra asked. "We stop pretending," Ronan said. "We stop hiding, and we finish this." Dawn broke over Ashmar in shades of gold and crimson, painting the desert in fire. By the time Ronan and Lyra descended from the ramparts, the palace was stirring, servants beginning their rounds, guards changing shifts, the machinery of the citadel grinding back to life. News of Theron's arrest had spread overnight. By mid-morning, the entire court knew. Reactions varied from shock to relief to barely concealed satisfaction. Theron had made enemies over the years. Many were glad to see him fall, but some weren't convinced. Lord Corvin found Ronan in the war room, surrounded by maps and reports. Lyra seated beside him reviewing witness statements from the guards who'd participated in Theron's capture. "Your Highness," Corvin said, his tone carefully neutral, "the council is demanding an emergency session." Ronan didn't look up from the map. "Let them demand. They want answers, evidence, a formal explanation of last night's events." "They'll get one," Ronan said flatly. "When I'm ready." Corvin's gaze shifted to Lyra, then back to Ronan. "They're questioning the legitimacy of your actions. Some are saying you've overstepped, that arresting a member of the royal family without council approval sets a dangerous precedent. And letting him commit treason doesn't?" Ronan's voice was cold. "He tried to kill my mate. He plotted a coup. He hired assassins and bribed guards and conspired to murder me the moment my father died. What part of that doesn't warrant arrest?" "I'm not disagreeing," Corvin said carefully. "I'm warning you. The council is fractured. Half of them support you, the other half are afraid. And fear makes people unpredictable." Ronan finally looked up, his eyes hard. "Then we give them certainty. Schedule the session for this afternoon. I'll present evidence, testimony, and Theron himself if they want to hear him confess in person." Corvin nodded slowly. "And Lady Lyra?" "We'll be there," Ronan said. "Beside me, where she belongs." Something flickered across Corvin's expression, surprise maybe, or approval. He inclined his head. "As you wish." After he left, Lyra turned to Ronan. "Are you sure about this? Bringing me into the council session?" "Absolutely," Ronan said. "They need to see you, need to understand that you're not some political pawn or convenient fiction. You're my mate, my partner. And anyone who questions that questions me." Lyra's chest tightened. "They'll use it against you, say you're compromised, that your judgment is clouded by—" She hesitated. "By love?" Ronan finished. "Let them. I'm done hiding what you mean to me." The council chamber felt different this time. The same cold stone, the same heavy table, the same faces, but the energy had shifted. Where before there'd been skepticism and condescension, now there was tension, uncertainty. The lords sat stiffly, their expressions guarded, watching Ronan and Lyra enter with wary eyes. King Aldrich was absent, too weak to be moved, according to the healers. His empty chair loomed at the head of the table like a ghost. Ronan took his place standing, not seated, not passive, but commanding the room with his presence alone. Lyra stood beside him, her spine straight, her hands folded calmly despite the way her pulse hammered. You all know why we're here, Ronan began, his voice cutting through the murmurs. Last night, my cousin Theron Varek orchestrated an attempt on Lady Lyra's life. He did so as part of a broader conspiracy to undermine my claim to the throne and seize power for himself. That's a serious accusation, one of the counselors said. Lord Varnus, a lean man with silver hair and calculating eyes. What proof do you offer? Ronan nodded to Captain Dane, who stepped forward carrying a leather satchel. From it, he produced documents. Letters bearing Theron's seal, payment records to known mercenaries, testimony from captured guards, the poison vial from the first assassin. Dane laid them on the table methodically. Written correspondence between Lord Theron and mercenary captains. Gold transfers traced to his personal coffers, signed confessions from 3 of his men. He paused. And the remains of the poison used in both attempts. A rare compound sourced from a single apothecary in the southern districts. An apothecary who confirmed Lord Theron as a frequent customer. Silence. The counselors leaned forward, examining the evidence, their faces grave. This proves financial transactions and poison purchases, Varnus said slowly. It doesn't prove intent to kill. Then perhaps this will, Ronan said coldly. He gestured to the guards at the door. Bring him in. They dragged Theron into the chamber, wrists shackled, shoulder bandaged, his fine clothes torn and blood-stained. But his smile remained, defiant and mocking even in chains. Hello, gentlemen, Theron said pleasantly. Lovely day for a trial, isn't it? This isn't a trial, Ronan said. This is a reckoning. Tell them what you told me, every detail, or I'll make sure the executioner takes his time. Theron's smile widened. Always so dramatic, cousin. He looked around the table, his gaze lingering on each face. Fine. Yes, I hired the assassins. Yes, I planned to kill the girl and destabilize Ronan's position. Yes, I intended to use the resulting chaos to seize the throne. He paused. And yes, half of you knew about it and said nothing because you wanted it to succeed. The chamber erupted. Counselors shouted denials, accusations flew, chairs scraped against stone as men stood and pointed fingers at each other. Ronan let it continue for exactly 10 seconds. Then he slammed his fist on the table hard enough to crack the wood. Enough! Silence fell like a guillotine. I don't care who knew, Ronan said, his voice lethal. I don't care who stayed silent or who looked the other way. What I care about is this. It ends now. The plotting, the scheming, the attempts to undermine me or use the people I care about as leverage. He looked around the table, meeting each man's eyes. My father is dying. Within weeks, maybe days, I will be king. And when that happens, there will be a new order in Ashmar. One built on loyalty, competence, and results, not bloodlines and backroom deals. Your Highness, Varnus said carefully, we understand your anger, but tradition nearly got my mate killed, Ronan interrupted. Tradition allowed men like Theron to operate unchecked for years. Tradition says an alpha needs a mate from noble blood. Yet the woman standing beside me has more courage and intelligence than half this council combined. He paused, his gaze hard. So forgive me if I don't give a damn about tradition. Lyra felt every eye turn to her. The weight of their stares, their judgment, their reassessment. But she didn't look away, didn't flinch. She met their gazes one by one, letting them see exactly what Ronan saw. Someone who'd survived when she shouldn't have, who'd adapted when others would have broken, who'd earned her place through sheer stubborn will. Finally, Lord Corvin spoke. What do you propose then? If tradition is insufficient, what takes its place? Merit, Ronan said simply. Prove your value, prove your loyalty, and you'll have a place in my administration. Fail to do either, and you're gone. He gestured to Theron, starting with him. What's his sentence? Another counselor asked. Exile, Ronan said, stripped of title, lands, and wealth. He leaves Ashmar within the week and never returns. If he does, the sentence becomes execution. Theron laughed, bitter and sharp. How merciful of you, cousin. I expected worse. You should thank Lyra, Ronan said coldly. She's the one who argued against a death sentence, said it would make you a martyr, that exile would be worse, living the rest of your life knowing you lost to someone you thought was beneath you. Theron's smile finally cracked. His eyes cut to Lyra, pure venom in his gaze. Lyra smiled back, cold and satisfied. "Enjoy the desert, Lord Theron. I hear it's lovely this time of year." The guards dragged him away, his curses echoing down the corridor. When the chamber cleared, only a handful of counselors remained, the ones Ronan trusted, the ones who'd supported him throughout. Corvin, Varnus, Captain Dane, and a few others. "We're with you," Corvin said quietly. "For what it's worth?" "It's worth a great deal," Ronan said. He glanced at Lyra. "And her? Are you with her too?" Corvin studied Lyra for a long moment, then he nodded. "She's proven herself, more than most do in a lifetime." Varnus cleared his throat. "If I may, there's still the matter of the coronation. Your father won't last much longer. When he passes, the ceremony must happen quickly to prevent further challenges to your authority." "How quickly?" Ronan asked. "Days. A week at most." Ronan's jaw tightened. "Then we prepare. Lyra and I will formalize the bond publicly before the coronation. No more questions about legitimacy, no more loopholes for my enemies to exploit." Lyra's heart skipped. "Ronan, unless you object," he added, turning to her, "I won't force this. If you want time, if you need—" "No," Lyra interrupted. "I don't need time, I just—" She hesitated, suddenly aware of the other men watching. "Can we talk? Alone?" Ronan dismissed the council with a wave. Once they were gone, he took Lyra's hands. "What is it?" he asked gently. "Are you sure?" Lyra said. "About making this real, about formalizing the bond in front of everyone? Because once we do, there's no going back. I'll be your queen, your mate, and I'm—" She stopped, the old insecurities rising. "I'm still just a girl from the slums, Ronan. I don't know how to be what they expect." "Good," Ronan said firmly, "because I don't want what they expect. I want you, exactly as you are, sharp and fierce and unbreakable." He cupped her face. "You think I chose you because you fit some mold? I chose you because you shattered it. Because you made me question everything I thought I knew about strength and power and what it means to lead." Lyra's eyes stung. "I'm afraid I'll let you down." "You won't," Ronan said. "And even if you stumble, even if you make mistakes, we'll face them together. That's what this is. Not you serving me or me protecting you, partners, equals." Lyra searched his face, looking for doubt, for hesitation. She found only certainty. "All right," she whispered. "Let's do it." Word spread through the palace like wildfire. The prince and his mate would formalize their bond in 3 days, followed by King Aldric's funeral and Ronan's coronation. The timeline was aggressive, almost unprecedented, but no one dared question it. Not after Theron's fall, not after seeing the evidence of conspiracy laid bare. Preparations consumed the citadel. Servants rushed to prepare the Great Hall, to arrange ceremonies, to coordinate with the priests and nobles and foreign dignitaries who would attend. Lyra found herself swept up in fittings and rehearsals and endless protocols. Lady Merrin took charge of her training with renewed intensity. "You'll stand before the entire kingdom," Merrin said, pinning Lyra's hair into an elaborate style. "Every eye will be on you, every word, every gesture will be analyzed. You must be perfect." "I'm not capable of perfect," Lyra said. "No one is," Merrin replied. "But you're capable of better, and better is enough." The day before the ceremony, Ronan's father requested to see them both. They found King Aldric in his chambers, propped against pillows, his breathing labored. He looked like a corpse already, skin translucent, eyes sunken, hands skeletal. But when Ronan and Lyra entered, those eyes still gleamed with fierce intelligence. "Sit," Aldric rasped. They sat. Lyra's hand found Ronan's automatically, their fingers intertwining. Aldric noticed. His mouth twitched, almost a smile. "Good. You've stopped pretending." "Yes, father," Ronan said quietly. "About damn time." Aldric coughed, the sound wet and painful. "I knew it was fake at first. Saw it in the way you looked at her. Calculation, strategy. But then it changed. You started looking at her the way I used to look at your mother." He paused, wheezing. "That's when I knew you'd be all right." Ronan's grip on Lyra's hand tightened. "I'm dying," Aldric continued bluntly. "Won't see the week out. But before I go, I want to tell you something." He looked at Lyra. "You're the best thing that ever happened to him. Not because of politics or alliances, but because you remind him what it means to be human, to care about something more than power." Lyra's throat closed. "Your Majesty." "Don't argue with a dying man," Aldrich interrupted. "Just promise me you'll keep him honest. Keep him grounded, and don't let this kingdom turn you into something you're not." "I promise," Lyra whispered. Aldrich nodded, satisfied. He turned to Ronan. "And you, rule better than I did. Be smarter, kinder, but never weak. This kingdom needs strength. It also needs heart. You've got both now. Don't lose either." "I won't," Ronan said, his voice thick. "Good boy." Aldrich's eyes drifted closed. "Now get out. Let an old man rest." They left quietly, Ronan's shoulders tight with barely controlled emotion. Outside the chamber he stopped, leaning against the wall, his breathing uneven. Lyra wrapped her arms around him from behind, resting her cheek against his back. "He's proud of you." "He's dying," Ronan said hoarsely. "And he's proud of you," Lyra repeated. "I heard it in every word." Ronan turned, pulling her close, burying his face in her hair. For a long moment they just stood there, holding each other in the empty corridor. The ceremony took place at sunset, the great hall filled to capacity with nobles, soldiers, priests, and representatives from every corner of the kingdom. Torches blazed along the walls. Banners bearing the Vorik wolf hung from the rafters. Lyra stood at the entrance, her heart pounding, wearing a gown of deep crimson silk that flowed like blood and fire. Her hair was swept up, held in place with silver pins shaped like wolves. Around her neck, the Vorik pendant gleamed. Ronan waited at the center of the hall, dressed in black and silver, his expression solemn. When their eyes met across the distance, everything else fell away. Lyra walked forward, not rushed, not hesitant, but steady. With every step, she felt the weight of their stares, their judgment. But she also felt Ronan's gaze, anchoring her, pulling her forward. When she reached him, he took her hands. His grip was warm, solid, real. The priest began the ritual, ancient words in a language Lyra barely understood, invoking bonds and oaths and eternal ties. But she didn't need to understand the words. She understood what they meant. This was her choice, her future, her home. When the priest asked for her vow, Lyra spoke clearly, her voice carrying through the hall. "I vow to stand beside you, to face whatever comes with courage and honesty, to be your partner, your equal, your mate, now and always." Ronan's eyes shone with something fierce and tender. When his turn came, his voice was steady and sure. "I vow to protect you, to honor you, to love you without condition or reservation, to build a kingdom worthy of you, to be the man you deserve, now and always." The priests bound their hands with a silver cord, speaking the final words. And then it was done. The hall erupted in applause, genuine this time, not forced or polite. Lyra saw faces in the crowd. Nobles who'd sneered at her, servants who'd whispered behind her back, guards who'd doubted she'd survive. But now they clapped, now they bowed, because she'd proven them all wrong. Ronan pulled her close and kissed her, deep and claiming and utterly public. When they broke apart, he whispered against her lips, "My queen." Lyra smiled, fierce and triumphant. "My king." The celebration lasted deep into the night, the great hall alive with music and laughter and the clink of goblets raised in toast after toast. Lyra stood beside Ronan at the high table, her hand resting in his, feeling the warmth of his palm against hers and the weight of 1,000 eyes that no longer looked at her with contempt, but with something closer to respect. It should have felt like victory. It should have felt like the end. But Lyra knew better. This was only the beginning. King Aldrich died 3 days later, just before dawn, with Ronan at his bedside. The old king's final words were spoken too quietly for the servants to hear. But when Ronan emerged from the chamber, his face was carved from stone and his eyes burned with something fierce and unbreakable. He didn't weep, didn't rage. He simply walked to the war room, called for Captain Dane and Lord Corvin, and began planning the funeral and coronation with the same cold efficiency he brought to battle. Lyra found him there hours later, surrounded by maps and documents, his jaw tight with exhaustion. "You need to rest," she said quietly. I need to finish this, Ronan replied without looking up. Lyra crossed to him, placing her hand over the document he was reading. Ronan, look at me. He did, finally, and she saw the grief there, raw and barely contained, threatening to crack the armor he wore so carefully. He's gone, Ronan said, his voice breaking on the words. And I should have told him. He knew, Lyra interrupted gently. Everything you needed to say he already knew. Ronan's breath shuddered. How can you be sure? Because I saw the way he looked at you in those final days, Lyra said. Pride, love, peace. He died knowing his kingdom would be in good hands. Ronan pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly she could feel his heart hammering against her chest. They stood like that for a long time, the war room quiet around them, until the trembling in his shoulders finally stilled. The funeral was held with all the ceremony befitting a king. Nobles from across Ashmar and beyond filled the citadel, dressed in black and silver, their faces solemn as King Aldrich's body was carried through the streets on a platform draped in the Varric colors. The people lined the roads, merchants and laborers, soldiers and children, watching in silence as their king made his final journey to the royal tombs carved into the desert cliffs. Lyra walked beside Ronan, her hand clasped in his, feeling the weight of tradition pressing down on them both. She wore black silk that moved like shadow, her hair bound in the elaborate style Lady Maren had taught her, the Varric pendant gleaming at her throat. At the tomb entrance, the high priest spoke the ancient rites, invoking the spirits of past kings and the eternal cycle of power and legacy. Ronan stood motionless throughout, his expression unreadable, his grip on Lyra's hand the only sign of the storm raging inside him. When the stone was sealed and the ceremony ended, Ronan turned to face the assembled crowd. My father was many things, he said, his voice carrying across the silent gathering. A warrior, a king, a man who ruled through strength and will, but he was also a man who understood that power without purpose is just tyranny in disguise. He paused, his gaze sweeping the crowd. He taught me that a true king doesn't just hold the throne, he earns it, every day, through action, through sacrifice, through service to the people who depend on him. Murmurs rippled through the assembly. Lyra felt the shift in the air, attention sharpening, old assumptions being reconsidered. Tomorrow I will be crowned, Ronan continued, and when I am, I will honor my father's memory by building a kingdom worthy of his legacy. Not through fear or tradition alone, but through merit and loyalty and the hard work of making Ashmar stronger, safer, and more just for everyone who calls it home. He looked at Lyra then, and something in his expression made her heart catch. And I will do it alongside the woman who has proven herself more capable, more courageous, and more deserving of respect than anyone I have ever known. He raised their joined hands. Your queen! The crowd erupted, not with polite applause, but with genuine cheers that echoed off the stone cliffs and rolled across the desert like thunder. Lyra's eyes stung. She hadn't expected this, hadn't dared to hope that the same people who'd mocked her and dismissed her would ever truly accept her. But here they were, cheering. For her. The coronation took place the following day in the Great Hall, transformed into something magnificent and terrible. Every surface gleamed with polished bronze and silver. Torches blazed in iron sconces. The Varric banners hung from the vaulted ceiling, their wolves seeming to move in the flickering light. The hall was packed beyond capacity. Nobles in their finest silks, soldiers in dress armor, foreign dignitaries representing kingdoms Lyra had only heard of in stories. And in the front rows, separated from the nobility by Lady Maren's careful orchestration, stood representatives from the common districts, merchants, craftsmen, even a few faces Lyra recognized from her days in the slums. She'd asked Ronan to invite them. He'd agreed without hesitation. They're part of this kingdom too, he'd said. They deserve to witness it. Now, as Lyra took her place beside the throne, not behind it, not subordinate to it, but equal, she felt the full weight of what they were attempting. A new order, a different kind of rule. The high priest stepped forward, ancient and wizened, carrying the crown on a cushion of black velvet. It was a brutal thing, iron and obsidian, shaped like a circlet of wolves with their jaws locked in eternal battle. Aldrich had worn it for 30 years. Before him, his father. And his father before that. Now it would be Ronan's. The priest began the ritual, his voice echoing through the hall. He spoke of duty and sacrifice, of the burden of rule and the responsibility to the land and the people. Lyra barely heard the words. She was focused on Ronan, on the way he stood perfectly still, his shoulders squared, his expression carved from granite. This was the moment he'd been fighting for his entire life, the moment that would define everything that came after. The priest raised the crown. Ronan Varric, son of Aldrich, heir to the throne of Ashmar, do you accept the burden of kingship? Do you swear to rule with wisdom and strength, to protect your people, to honor the legacy of those who came before? I do, Ronan said, his voice steady and sure. Then by the authority vested in me, and in the name of our ancestors, the priest lowered the crown onto Ronan's head. I proclaim you king of Ashmar. The hall exploded with sound, cheers and drums and the clash of weapons on shields. Ronan stood, the crown settled on his brow, and for a moment he looked exactly like the paintings of his forebears, fierce and unbreakable, a king forged in fire. Then he turned to Lyra. The noise died as quickly as it had risen, the entire hall holding its breath. Ronan extended his hand. Stand with me. Lyra took it, her heart pounding, and let him pull her to her feet. Together, they faced the crowd, king and queen, alpha and mate, two people who'd started as strangers bound by necessity and become something neither had expected. This is your queen, Ronan said, his voice carrying to every corner of the hall. She came from nothing. She survived when she shouldn't have. She fought when others would have surrendered. And she proved that strength has nothing to do with bloodlines and everything to do with the will to endure. He looked at Lyra, and the raw emotion in his eyes made her breath catch. I would not be standing here without her. Ashmar would not be whole without her. And anyone who questions her place beside me questions me. Silence. Absolute and total. Then, from the back of the hall, someone began to clap. Slowly at first, then faster. Others joined, nobles and commoners alike, their applause building into a roar that shook the rafters. Lyra felt tears slide down her cheeks, hot and unbidden. She didn't try to hide them, didn't try to appear strong or unaffected. She let them see her, all of her, the girl from the slums and the woman who'd survived assassination attempts and political warfare and every attempt to break her. She let them see her cry, and in doing so, she let them see her triumph. The celebration that followed was unlike anything Lyra had ever witnessed. The palace opened its gates to the city, and people flooded in, rich and poor, noble and common, all mingling in the courtyards and gardens. Food was distributed freely. Musicians played in every corner. Children ran through the halls, their laughter echoing off ancient stone. Ronan moved through the crowds with Lyra at his side, greeting people, listening to concerns, making himself accessible in a way his father never had. Lyra watched him work, saw the way people responded, the initial wariness melting into something like hope. Late in the evening, an old woman approached them, bent and weathered, her hands gnarled with age and labor. She looked at Lyra with eyes that had seen too much and smiled. I remember you, she said quietly, from the market district, years ago. You helped my grandson when he was sick, gave him your last piece of bread. Lyra's breath caught. She did remember, a boy, maybe 6 years old, burning with fever while his grandmother begged for help from merchants who turned away. Is he all right? Lyra asked. The woman's smile widened. He's a soldier now, serves in the king's guard. She reached out, taking Lyra's hand in her weathered grip. You were kind when you had nothing. Now you have everything. Don't forget where you came from. I won't, Lyra promised. Ever. The woman nodded, satisfied, and melted back into the crowd. Ronan squeezed Lyra's hand. You all right? Better than all right, Lyra said. I think I'm starting to understand what this means. What means? Being queen, Lyra said. It's not about the crown or the title or the power. It's about remembering that every person in this kingdom has a story, has struggles, has hopes. She looked up at him, and making sure those stories matter. Ronan's expression softened. You're going to change everything, aren't you? We are, Lyra corrected. Together. The challenges began almost immediately. The northern border lords, emboldened by Aldrich's death and uncertain of Ronan's strength, began testing boundaries, withholding taxes, delaying troop deployments, making noise about autonomy and independence. Ronan's response was swift and calculated. He rode north with Lyra and a small contingent of guards. No army, no show of force, just the new king and his queen arriving unannounced at the border estates. The lords were caught off guard. They'd expected threats or military pressure. Instead, Ronan sat down with them, all of them, in a single hall, and laid out his vision. "I'm not my father," he said bluntly. "I'm not interested in ruling through fear or keeping you in line through force, but I'm interested in results. You want autonomy? Earn it. Prove that your territories are stable, productive, and loyal. Do that, and I'll give you more freedom than you've ever had." "And if we refuse?" one lord asked, his tone challenging. "Then I'll replace you with someone who will," Ronan said simply. Merit over bloodline. That's the new rule. The lords exchanged glances. Some looked angry, others thoughtful. Lyra spoke then, her voice calm but firm. "My husband is offering you a partnership, a chance to build something better. But if you choose conflict over cooperation, you'll find that we're very good at conflict." The implied threat hung in the air. After a long moment, the eldest lord, a grizzled man named Corvin who'd ruled his lands for 40 years, laughed. "I like her," he said, nodding at Lyra. "She's got steel." He looked at Ronan. "All right, Majesty, we'll try it your way, but we'll be watching." "So will I," Ronan said. By the time they returned to the citadel, word had spread. The northern lords had bent the knee, not through force but through negotiation and respect. It was unprecedented, and it worked. Other challenges followed, a drought in the western provinces that required emergency water redistribution, a trade dispute with a neighboring kingdom that threatened to escalate into war, corruption in the city guard that Lyra uncovered during a surprise inspection of the slum districts. Each time Ronan and Lyra faced it together, him with strategy and strength, her with insight and empathy. They complemented each other in ways that surprised even them, covering weaknesses and amplifying strengths. The council learned quickly that arguing with the queen was as dangerous as challenging the king. Lyra had a mind for details they overlooked, and a perspective shaped by survival that cut through political posturing like a knife. "The grain stores in the southern district are insufficient," she said during one session, laying out reports she'd personally reviewed. "We're 3 weeks from winter, and if the harvest fails, people will starve." "The southern district has always managed," Lord Varnus said dismissively. "Managed by dying quietly?" Lyra shot back. "I've seen those streets. I know what managing looks like. It looks like children with distended bellies and mothers selling everything they own for scraps." She leaned forward. "We're not doing that again. Reallocate resources from the surplus northern stores, institute price controls on basic goods, and open the palace reserves if necessary." Varnus sputtered. "The palace reserves are for emergencies." "Starvation is an emergency," Lyra interrupted coldly. Ronan, seated beside her, smiled faintly. "You heard the queen. Make it happen." The policy was implemented within days. When the harvest did fail, as Lyra had predicted, the southern district survived. Barely, but they survived, and the people remembered who had fought for them. 6 months into Ronan's reign, a delegation arrived from a distant kingdom, Valdoria, a wealthy trade power across the desert. They came with proposals for alliances, trade agreements, and thinly veiled assessments of Ashmar's new leadership. The lead ambassador, a polished man named Corson, spent 3 days touring the citadel and the capital, observing everything. On the final evening, Ronan and Lyra hosted a formal dinner in his honor. Corson was all smiles and smooth words, praising Ashmar's progress and Ronan's vision. But his eyes kept drifting to Lyra, assessing, calculating. Finally, over dessert, he spoke directly to her. "Forgive my curiosity, Your Majesty, but I've heard remarkable stories about you. They say you were a commoner before the king chose you." "That's true," Lyra said evenly. "Fascinating," Corson said, though his tone suggested otherwise. "And yet here you sit, advising on matters of state, influencing policy. Some might find that unusual." Lyra set down her wine glass carefully. "Unusual because I lack noble blood? Or unusual because I actually understand what life is like for the people we govern?" Corson's smile tightened. "I meant no offense." "Of course not," Lyra said. "But let me be clear. My value to this kingdom has nothing to do with bloodlines and everything to do with experience. I've lived in the slums. I've gone hungry. I've watched the system fail people who deserved better. And now that I have the power to change that system, I will, whether anyone finds it unusual or not. Silence around the table. Corson studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Valdoria respects strength, he said finally, in all its forms. I believe we can do business with Ashmar. The trade agreement was signed the next day. After Corson's delegation departed, Ronan found Lyra on the eastern ramparts, their place where they'd first confessed the truth to each other. You handled him perfectly, Ronan said, joining her at the wall. I almost called him an entitled ass, Lyra admitted. Ronan laughed, genuine and warm. That would have been memorable. They stood in comfortable silence, watching the sun set over the desert in shades of gold and crimson. Do you ever regret it? Lyra asked quietly. Choosing me? Making this harder than it had to be? Ronan turned to her, his expression serious. Not once. Not for a single second. He cupped her face gently. You didn't make it harder, Lyra. You made it possible. Everything we've accomplished, every change we've made, none of it would have happened with some noble daughter who cared more about appearances than people. Lyra leaned into his touch. I love you. I love you too, Ronan said, more than I thought I was capable of. He kissed her then, slow and deep, and Lyra felt the same rush of certainty she'd felt that first night when everything changed, the sense that this, right here, was exactly where she was meant to be. The first anniversary of Ronan's coronation arrived with festivities that lasted a full week. The kingdom had transformed under their rule, more stable, more prosperous, more just. Trade had increased. Crime had decreased. The border lords remained loyal. And the common people, for the first time in generations, had a voice in their own governance through councils Lyra had established in every district. On the anniversary day itself, Ronan and Lyra stood on the palace balcony overlooking the capital. Below, the streets were filled with celebration, music and dancing, food and laughter, children playing freely without fear. Look at them, Lyra said softly. Happy, safe. Because of you, Ronan said. Because of us, Lyra corrected. Ronan pulled her close, his arm around her waist. I have something for you. He reached into his coat and produced a small wooden box. Lyra took it, her hands trembling slightly as she opened it. Inside was a pendant, not silver or gold, but carved from desert stone shaped like a flame. It represents you, Ronan said quietly. Fire, light, something that burns bright even in the harshest conditions, something that can't be extinguished. Lyra's vision blurred. Ronan, you transformed this kingdom, he continued. You transformed me, and I wanted you to have something that symbolizes what you are, unbreakable. Lyra threw her arms around him, burying her face in his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart beneath her cheek. Thank you, she whispered, for everything, for seeing me when no one else did, for believing I was worth more than survival. You were always worth more, Ronan said fiercely. The world just needed to catch up. That night, as they lay together in the vast royal chambers, Lyra thought about the girl she'd been a year ago, desperate, angry, certain that she'd die alone and forgotten in some gutter. That girl would never have believed this was possible, would never have imagined standing beside a king, ruling a kingdom, being loved completely and without reservation. But here she was, against every odd, despite every obstacle. She'd survived, she'd fought, she'd won, and in doing so, she had proven that power didn't belong to those born into it, but to those brave enough to claim it. What are you thinking about? Ronan asked, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her shoulder. The future, Lyra said. And what do you see? Lyra smiled. Everything. Years would pass, challenges would come and go. Some battles they'd win easily. Others would cost them blood and tears and sleepless nights. But they'd face it all together. The tavern dancer who became a queen, and the alpha prince who learned that strength came in forms he'd never expected. They'd build a kingdom where merit mattered more than birthright, where courage was valued over cruelty, where the girl from the slums could stand equal to kings because she'd earned it through sheer stubborn will. And when the histories were written, when scholars debated the turning points of Ashmar's golden age, They would point to this moment, to the night a desperate prince offered a deal to a defiant woman in a back alley and changed the course of a kingdom forever. Because sometimes the most powerful thing a person can do is survive long enough to prove everyone wrong, and then build something beautiful from the ashes of their doubt. The desert winds would carry their story for generations. The alpha who chose love over tradition, and the queen who rose from nothing to reshape an entire world. Two people who refused to break, two people who became everything they were never supposed to be. Together. 3 years into their reign, Lyra stood in the council chamber, reviewing construction plans for a new school in the southern district when a messenger arrived, breathless and wide-eyed. "Your Majesty," the young man gasped, bowing quickly. "There's a situation at the eastern gate. A group of refugees from the borderlands. Nearly 200 people. They're requesting asylum." Lyra's pulse quickened. Refugee situations were delicate, resources were finite, and the council had already pushed back twice this year on accepting displaced populations. But she also remembered what it felt like to have nowhere to go. "I'll handle it," she said, already moving toward the door. "Your Majesty, perhaps we should wait for the king," Lord Varnus began. "The king is overseeing the northern trade negotiations," Lyra interrupted, "and these people have been traveling for weeks. They need answers now, not when it's convenient for our schedule." She swept out before he could argue further, Captain Dane falling into step behind her with 4 guards. The eastern gate was chaos. Families huddled together, children crying, men and women with hollow eyes and torn clothing that spoke of hard travel and harder times. The gate guard stood at attention, uncertain, while the crowd pressed forward desperately. Lyra pushed through, and the moment the refugees saw her, saw the crown and the Varric pendant, a hush fell over them. An older woman stepped forward, her face weathered but her spine straight. "Your Majesty, we've heard stories about Ashmar, about a queen who came from nothing and remembers what it means to survive." Her voice cracked. "We're begging you. Our village was destroyed by raiders. We have nowhere else to go." Lyra looked at the faces, exhausted, terrified, desperate. She saw herself in every one of them. "How many are injured?" she asked. 30, maybe 40, the woman said. "Mostly children and elderly." Lyra turned to Captain Dane. "Get the healers from the palace. Set up a temporary camp in the eastern meadow. Tents, food, water. Anyone who's hurt gets treated immediately." Dane hesitated. "Your Majesty, the council?" "We'll discuss it when I'm ready to discuss it," Lyra said firmly. "These people need help now. We'll figure out the politics later." Dane nodded and dispatched runners. Within an hour, the meadow was transformed into a functioning camp. Healers moved among the refugees, treating wounds and distributing medicine. Servants brought bread, dried meat, and water. Children who'd been crying moments before now sat eating, their small faces beginning to relax. Lyra moved through the camp, speaking to families, listening to their stories. A man who'd lost his wife to the raiders. A mother traveling alone with 3 children under the age of 6. An old craftsman whose hands trembled from injury, but who still carried his tools because they were all he had left. Each story carved itself into her heart. By the time Ronan arrived, summoned from his negotiations by a concerned Corvin, the camp was settled, and Lyra was sitting with a group of children, teaching them a hand-clapping game she'd learned in the slums. Ronan watched from a distance, something unreadable in his expression. When Lyra finally noticed him and stood, brushing dust from her gown, he approached slowly. "You started a refugee camp without council approval," he said. "I did," Lyra confirmed, lifting her chin. "Lord Varnus is furious. He's calling an emergency session." "Let him." Ronan studied her for a long moment. Then he smiled, fierce and proud. "Good, because I already told him we're keeping them. All of them." Lyra's breath caught. "You did?" "Of course," Ronan said. "You think I'd let politics override doing what's right?" He glanced at the camp, at the families beginning to settle in for the night. "Besides, we need craftsmen, laborers, people willing to work hard and build a life here. These people have already proven they're survivors. That's exactly what Ashmar needs." Lyra felt tears sting her eyes. She stepped into his arms, pressing her face against his chest. "Thank you." "For what?" Ronan asked, his hand stroking her hair. "For understanding," Lyra whispered. for being the kind of king who sees people, not problems. I learned that from you, Ronan said quietly. The council session that followed was predictably contentious. Lord Varnus argued about resources and precedent. Others worried about security and integration. But Ronan and Lyra stood united, presenting a comprehensive plan for housing, employment, and assimilation that left little room for argument. In the end, the council approved it, not unanimously, but enough. Over the following months, the refugees integrated into Ashmar's society. The craftsman opened a workshop that employed 12 people within 6 months. The mother with 3 children became an assistant teacher in the new school. The old woman who'd first spoken to Lyra started a community garden that fed half the southern district, and Lyra watched it all unfold with quiet satisfaction, knowing that every person she'd helped was proof that compassion and strength weren't opposites. They were partners. One evening, 5 years into their reign, Ronan found Lyra in the palace library, surrounded by scrolls and ledgers, her hair falling loose from its pins. "You're still working," he observed. "The education initiative needs final approval before next quarter," Lyra said without looking up. "If we can get funding approved, we can open 3 more schools by spring." Ronan crossed to her, gently taking the quill from her hand. "It's midnight, Lyra. The schools will still need funding tomorrow." She finally looked up at him, seeing the concern in his eyes. "I just want to make sure we don't lose momentum. There are still children in this kingdom who can't read, who don't have opportunities. And you're fixing that," Ronan interrupted gently. "One school at a time, one policy at a time. But you can't save everyone in a single night." Lyra's shoulders sagged. "Sometimes it feels like we're moving too slowly, like for every person we help there are 10 more we're missing." Ronan pulled her to her feet and into his arms. "Do you know what I see when I look at this kingdom now? I see children playing in streets that used to be dangerous. I see markets thriving where there used to be poverty. I see people who believe their lives can get better because you showed them it's possible." He tilted her chin up. "You've changed everything, Lyra. Don't let perfection become the enemy of the incredible progress you've already made." She leaned into him, letting his strength anchor her. "How do you always know exactly what I need to hear?" "Because I know you," Ronan said simply. "Better than anyone." They stood like that for a long moment, the library quiet around them, before Ronan spoke again. "I have news," he said. "The healers confirmed it this morning. You're pregnant." Lyra's world tilted. She pulled back, staring at him. "What?" Ronan's smile was soft and wondering. "We're going to have a child." Lyra's hand went to her stomach automatically, her mind reeling. A baby. Their baby. An heir to everything they'd built. "How do you feel about it?" Ronan asked carefully. Lyra thought about the girl she'd been, alone, terrified, certain she'd never have anything worth protecting. Then she thought about the woman she'd become, a queen, a partner, someone who'd built a life beyond her wildest dreams. Terrified, she admitted, and happy, and hopeful. She looked up at him. "We're going to teach them differently. No one will ever make our child feel worthless because of where they come from, or what they look like, or who they choose to be." "No," Ronan agreed fiercely. "They'll grow up knowing that strength comes in many forms, that compassion is power, that their mother clawed her way from nothing to reshape a kingdom, and that they can do anything if they're brave enough to try." Lyra kissed him then, deep and grateful and full of promise for everything yet to come. 9 months later, when their daughter was born, small and perfect and screaming with the fury of someone who already knew her own mind, Lyra held her and wept. Not from pain or fear, but from the overwhelming knowledge that she'd created something pure and good from a life that had started with nothing but survival. They named her Arya, and when Lyra looked into her daughter's eyes, she saw the future, not as something to fear, but as something to fight for. Because that's what they'd always done. Fought, survived, won. And now they had someone else to fight for, someone who would grow up in a kingdom that valued courage over cruelty, merit over birthright, and love over everything else. The tavern dancer and the alpha prince had built something that would outlast them both. A kingdom where anyone, no matter where they started, could become exactly who they were meant to be.